Hi, I'm Delaney, and this is the story of how a town banner, a guest name tag, and one forgotten envelope taught me that sometimes being erased quietly can hurt more than being pushed out loud. At Founders Day, every name in my family was printed in gold, except mine. But the truth is, I was never just left out, I was written out. Before we go any further, tell me, have you ever felt like an outsider in your own family? If yes, comment number 1. If no, comment number 0. This is a family drama you don't want to miss. I stood outside the town hall, staring at the Founders Day banner, every name on it etched in gold. Except mine. The early June sun had just dipped low enough to cast that soft amber glow across the bricks, the kind of light that made even peeling paint look nostalgic. Maplewood had always been like that, charming in a way that could distract you from what hurt. People walked past me in sundresses and straw hats, nodding politely. I smiled back like I belonged, but I kept my hands in my pockets, just in case someone noticed the absence of a name tag. I hadn't expected to feel anything walking up to the town hall today. This wasn't my first time being left out. But when I spotted the commemorative banner, stretched proudly between two old oak trees, I couldn't stop the pinch in my chest. Hart family. Colleen, Martin, Savannah, gold lettering, pressed into cream vinyl. The same font I used 10 years ago when I helped design the template for the archives. That detail felt crueler than it had any right to be. My feet carried me forward out of reflex. The reception crowd was thick near the steps. Aldermen, longtime residents, local shop owners handing out lemonade in paper cups. Everyone wore their nameplates clipped neatly to their chests. Some read Honored Guest. Others had a title beneath: First Family, Committee Chair, Founding Lineage. A woman in a teal dress stepped close, blinking at me. "Are you with the Hart family?" she asked kindly. Or, "Oh, you must be part of the Heritage Board." I nodded once. Something like that. She didn't press. No one ever did. That was the skill Maplewood taught. Learn to smile without asking questions. Up near the steps, I caught sight of them. My parents, standing with Savannah at the top of the landing, framed by bunting and rose garlands. Colleen wore navy with a pearl brooch that once belonged to my grandmother. She looked exactly the way people expected a Civic Woman of the Year to look. Martin was filming Savannah as she adjusted her hair and grinned at a photographer. She had on that pale floral dress that fit her like a memory of summer. They didn't see me, or maybe they did and decided to pretend otherwise. I wasn't sure which one felt worse. A man tripped slightly near the curb, older, walking carefully, balancing himself with a worn cane. His hat tilted as he stumbled forward. I stepped out and caught his elbow gently. "You okay?" He blinked up, breath shallow, eyes familiar. "Delaney," he rasped. "Didn't see you there." "Hi, Walter." I smiled, helping him steady himself. "Let's get you to a seat." Most of the benches were taken, but I found an empty spot in the shade and guided him down slowly. His legs shook a little as he settled. "Didn't expect to see you here," he murmured. "Didn't expect to come," I replied. "Guess I was curious." He looked toward the front of the building, where Savannah was now taking a microphone from the mayor. "They're putting on a real show this year," he said softly. "Your mother's good at that." I didn't answer. Instead, I watched as my sister launched into a glowing speech about family legacies, her voice sweet and sure. Laughter rose in the crowd. People applauded. A toddler beside me clapped with sticky hands. After the speeches ended, I wandered toward the exhibit display. A long row of mounted boards showcased the oldest families in town. Generations of contributions, school honors, service records. I knew the layout well. I helped digitize it during my senior year. One display stood out. The Hart family, 4 generations of civic leadership. I saw the picture before I saw the plaque. A photo taken 2 summers ago at a fundraising gala. Colleen, Martin, Savannah, all beaming. I was there that night. I remembered the black dress I wore, the shoes that were too tight, the way I poured punch and made polite conversation with donors I didn't know. I'd stood next to Savannah during that photo, but in this version, I wasn't there. The crop was clean, seamless, as though I'd never stood beside them at all. I wasn't just forgotten, I was erased. The envelope said Founder's Reception, Hart Family, +1. I guess I wasn't the one. The woman at the registration table smiled at me without really seeing me. Her name tag read Margaret in bold black print, and her blouse had tiny embroidered violets. "Here you go," she said cheerfully, handing me a plain white badge. I looked at it. No crest, no ribbon, no name. Just the word guest, printed in quiet Times New Roman. I clipped it to my cardigan and kept walking, pretending it didn't sting. Inside the Maplewood Public Library, the reception was in full swing. The main reading room had been transformed, tables dressed in floral linens, tea sandwiches under glass domes, and centerpieces of white hydrangeas and baby's breath. A string quartet played softly from the far corner, their music floating up toward the arched ceiling like bubbles no one dared to pop. I scanned the name cards on the long table near the front. Hart family had its own centerpiece, taller than the rest, with a golden H glinting in the middle. Savannah's name was there in bold script. So was Martin's, Colleen's, even Aunt Harriet's, who hadn't stepped foot in Vermont since 2014. But there was no card for Delaney, not even a spare. A woman I vaguely recognized from church leaned over from the next table. "Oh, hey, I thought you weren't coming," she said with a smile too bright for the moment. I tried not to wince. "Surprise," she laughed awkwardly. "Your mom told everyone it was a closed family celebration. Just keeping the focus on Savannah, you know? All that legacy stuff." "Sure," I murmured, unsure whether I wanted to vanish or freeze time. She patted my hand once, gently, and turned back to her cucumber sandwich. I didn't know what was worse, the people who didn't acknowledge the slight or the ones who did and still played along. I found a seat near the back, next to a high schooler scribbling on a crossword and an elderly woman who'd clearly nodded off. No one looked my way, and I was grateful for that. A waiter passed with a silver tray, and I reached for a cup of lemon tea. As I turned, my elbow brushed the edge of the Hart table. Something slipped. I caught it without thinking. A thick ivory envelope, sealed with gold foil. The handwriting on the front read, "Hart Documents Private." I meant to place it back. I really did. But then I saw the corner peeking out. A printed title in all caps, "Property Review Packet." My stomach turned. I tucked the envelope under my arm and walked toward the stacks, my feet moving like they did when I was a teenager needing air. I knew every inch of this library, every creaky floorboard, every shelf that leaned just slightly. I slipped into the reference section, behind the biographies, and opened the envelope slowly. Inside were several printed pages, neatly clipped. At the top, "Review of Family Holdings, Bellamy Trust." I scanned the first page. The Barrow House, the Birchfield Lot, the Seaside Parcel, all marked "Transferred, June 2023. I flipped to the fourth page, the one with the allocations. Savannah Hart, primary. Colleen Hart, secondary. Martin Hart, trustee. No mention of Delaney, not as contingent, Not even as footnote. I blinked. Once. Twice. I reread the lines, hoping my name had been smudged, mistyped, anything. But there it was. My absence printed as clearly as any presence, like I'd never existed. Someone nearby cleared their throat, and I stuffed the packet back into the envelope. My hand shook. I felt exposed, like the paper had shouted something I wasn't ready to hear. I returned to the table quietly, slipped the envelope back where it had been, and sat down. Savannah was giving a toast now, her voice full of practiced warmth. "I wouldn't be who I am without my incredible family," she said. Cameras clicked. Guests dabbed their eyes. My mother beamed. I watched her lean in and kiss Savannah's cheek, whisper something proud. The room blurred at the edges, the music too sweet, the air too warm. And just like that, I wasn't just a stranger, I was nobody. My emotions are like the bottom of the abyss right now. Is this family? Why am I not on the list? Why am I so invisible? Have you ever felt like I do now? If you sympathize with me, please leave a comment number 9 in the comment section below. Now, let's get to the next development of this story. That night, I pulled the old shoebox from under my bed, the one labeled "For When It Hurts Too Much." The label was written in purple marker, the kind that fades to gray after a decade. I'd scrawled it there when I was 19, during a long summer of silence after my parents skipped my college orientation. I'd nearly thrown the box away a dozen times, but something always stopped me. Some quiet thread tethered to the idea that if I held on to pieces, they couldn't erase the whole. I sat cross-legged on the hardwood floor, the box between my knees, a mug of lukewarm tea balanced on the radiator. Outside, the streetlight flickered against the side of the building like a restless thought. The box was full of what I used to call emotional leftovers, birthday cards that stopped after age 21, a copy of a speech I wrote for a school board award no one attended, notes from my grandmother Irene in a looping, deliberate script. One envelope near the bottom still smelled faintly of rose soap. Inside was a letter from her, dated just 6 months before she passed. "Delaney," it began, "not everyone will understand the quiet strength you carry. Some will mistake your calm for absence. But I see you." I read that line twice, then a third time. My throat tightened. Next came old school forms, library name tags, even a church bulletin with a smiley face she drew next to my name. I sorted everything slowly, waiting for the ache to ease. It didn't. My eyes drifted to the envelope I'd returned at the reception. Property review packet. The words felt branded behind my eyelids. I hadn't imagined it. My name had been wiped from the records like chalk from slate. I reached into my desk and pulled out my own records. Among them, a lease agreement I'd signed the summer I graduated. My legal signature, every loop and line is familiar. I took a photo of it with my phone, then opened my laptop and began searching. There was still a shared folder from the Hart Family Foundation, leftover access from when I used to volunteer as a junior bookkeeper. They'd never revoked my login. Typical. I clicked through documents, nothing at first, but old budgets and tax forms. Then I saw it, a file labeled Trust Allocation, Final Review.pdf. I opened it, and there it was again, my name missing from all the line items. Savannah's allocation was bolded. There was even a section for public relations photography, an email chain about maintaining a streamlined family image. I clicked out of the file, heart racing. Then came another message, one I'd forgotten I forwarded to myself years ago. A scanned copy of the original Irene Bellamy Trust outline. It was dated 2016, and it had my name. Primary beneficiary, Delaney Hart. It read. I stared at the line, barely breathing. Before I could process it all, my phone rang. "Walter." Delaney, he said after a pause, I found something you need to see. My fingers tightened on the phone. Is it about my grandmother's estate? He didn't answer immediately. It's something I've kept in my safe, for when the time was right. I think that time's now. I closed my laptop, and the room was suddenly too quiet. Why me? I asked. Because she trusted you, he said. And I do too. The call ended, but the words lingered. I reached for the folder again, lining up the two signatures, my real one from the lease agreement and the one on the transfer form I'd seen at the reception. The difference was clear. The forged one had a loop that leaned left. Mine always curved right. This wasn't just family politics. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a decision, intentional, calculated, and signed with someone else's hand. I sat in silence for a long time, the weight of it settling like dust in an old room. Part of me wanted to cry, to scream, to pack a suitcase and drive until the road ran out. But another part, the part Irene nurtured, knew what to do next. I gathered the documents, careful and steady. I slid the originals into a new folder, labeled it with my name. Not initials. Not a guest. If they thought I'd just disappear, they forgot who raised me. I was there when your grandmother signed it, Walter said, and I never forgot why. His voice carried the weight of years, low and steady, like the ticking of the antique clock on his mantel. The same one that had been in that exact spot since I was 8, maybe longer. Walter's house smelled like cedar and thyme, like paperbacks, old cardigans, and something faintly lemony that reminded me of my grandmother Irene's kitchen. We sat across from each other in his living room, the light from a single floor lamp casting soft shadows over the rug. Outside, rain tapped politely against the windows, as if asking to be part of the moment. Walter reached down and pulled a leather binder from the cabinet beneath his side table. He set it on his lap with a reverence usually reserved for heirlooms or confessions. I never meant to keep it from you, he said, sliding the binder open with careful fingers. But your mother made it difficult. I didn't speak. I didn't have to. He knew the silence between words. He lifted a page encased in a plastic sleeve and handed it to me. My breath caught. There it was. Irene's handwriting, unmistakable and looping across the top. To be held for Delaney Hart, in the event that my intentions are ever questioned. Below that, a notarized copy of the original will. Primary beneficiary, Delaney Hart. My name in bold. Not a footnote, not a secondary clause, not omitted. I read it 3 times. My fingertips trembled as I touched the embossed seal near the bottom. There was a note attached in her writing. Because you listen. Because you care when no one watches. This family needs someone like that, even if they can't see it yet. I swallowed hard. She really meant it, I said softly. Walter nodded. She didn't want a legacy built on appearances. She wanted someone to protect what mattered. He handed me a second page, a photo of the signing day, dated and labeled. Irene, Walter, and a young notary with nervous hands. No Colleen, no Martin. They never saw this version, he said. Your mother had her attorney file an amended one, said it was what your grandmother really wanted. But Irene never signed that. I looked up, meeting his eyes. And you just kept it all this time? He smiled, sad and a little tired. Because I knew the day would come when someone tried to erase you. Irene did, too. A lump formed in my throat. Not from pain this time, but from the strange comfort of being known, truly seen, even in absence. He leaned back slowly, hands clasped over his knee. She used to talk about you, you know. Said you were the only one who ever helped her clean the church steps after Founder's Day. You didn't do it for praise. You did it because you noticed. That memory returned with sharp clarity. Me at 12, in scuffed shoes, scrubbing wax from the sidewalk, while Irene hummed hymns under her breath. I hadn't thought of it in years. I folded the letter carefully and placed it back into the sleeve. So, what happens now? Walter nodded toward the binder. That's up to you, but don't let them shape the story to suit their pride. That's not the legacy Irene wanted. We sat in silence for a while, the kind that fills a room rather than empties it. The clock ticked on. Rain softened. A branch tapped gently against the glass, like a forgotten memory returning home. Before I left, he pressed the binder into my arms with both hands. Take it. It's yours. It always was. At the door, I turned back once more. Walter? He looked up. Thank you for remembering. He gave me a small smile. Some things are too important to forget. Outside, the rain had stopped, but the air was thick with that after-storm hush. I walked home slowly, binder clutched against my chest like armor. Back in my apartment, I turned on the hallway light and set the binder down on the kitchen table. I poured myself a glass of water, let it sit untouched, and instead opened the binder again. This time with no hesitation. I read every word Irene had written, every underline and margin note. Then I whispered the promise into the stillness around me. I won't, I whispered. Not this time. The last time I stood in front of people in a suit, I was trying to prove I belonged. This time, I already knew. The courtroom was nothing like the ones on television. No polished mahogany, no dramatic echo with every step. Just beige walls, humming fluorescent lights, and a worn carpet that smelled faintly of old paper and winter boots. But for me, this place held more weight than any stage or spotlight. It was the first time I walked into a room like this, not hoping to be invited in, but prepared to speak, even if no one wanted to hear it. Rachel stood beside me at the plaintiff's table, her posture composed but firm. She wore a navy suit that still had a slight student's wrinkle in the shoulder, but her expression was pure steel. Across from us sat Colleen and Martin, rigid in tailored silence. Savannah scrolled absently on her phone like she was waiting for a dentist appointment. I didn't expect her to look up, and she didn't. The judge, a woman in her 50s with silver streaks in her bun and a no-nonsense tone, called the hearing to order. Her voice sliced through the room like a paper cutter. "Ms. Hart," she said, looking at me without blinking. "You're contesting the most recent version of the Bellamy Trust. Is that correct?" "Yes, Your Honor," I replied, voice even, hands clasped just below the table. Rachel stood. "We'd like to submit Exhibits A through D. These include the original 2016 trust document signed and witnessed by Irene Bellamy, a notarized copy retained by Walter Bell, and a comparison of signatures between Ms. Delaney Hart and the forged version submitted in the 2023 amendment." The judge raised an eyebrow. "Forgery!" Rachel passed the documents forward. The 2023 file omits Ms. Hart entirely and contains a signature that, according to both handwriting analysis and legal review, deviates significantly from her established record. We also have the original witness here today. Walter rose slowly from the gallery, steadying himself with his cane. Every shuffle he took toward the witness stand felt like a heartbeat, slow and deliberate. Once sworn in, Rachel asked gently, "Mr. Bell, can you tell the court what you brought with you today?" Walter held up the folder. "This is the copy Irene gave me personally, with instructions to deliver it if her wishes were ever challenged." She told me to protect her voice when she couldn't use it anymore. And who was named as the primary beneficiary? He looked directly at me. Delaney. She was always the one who showed up. Irene trusted her with what mattered. Colleen stirred beside her lawyer. He's not family, she said aloud, more to the room than the court. He doesn't understand the bigger picture. The judge held up a hand. You'll have your turn, Mrs. Hart, Rachel continued. Mr. Bell, do you recognize this signature? Walter adjusted his glasses. Yes, it's Delaney's, the real one. The other, he pointed to the forged document. That's not her handwriting. Irene would have noticed that immediately. The judge flipped through the exhibits. This 2016 version was properly witnessed, notarized, and filed, though not enacted after Irene's passing. Why? Rachel answered, because Colleen Hart filed a second version through a different attorney, one that omitted Delaney entirely. All eyes turned to my mother. Colleen stood then, her voice smooth like it always was at charity luncheons. Your Honor, my daughter has always been unconventional. She distanced herself from the family, and my mother didn't want the foundation's legacy tarnished by instability. We simply ensured her original intentions matched our shared vision. The judge didn't blink. Intentions are not law, Mrs. Hart. Documents are. Savannah finally looked up from her phone, her face unreadable. The judge set the papers down with a soft thump. Given the evidence, I find the 2016 document valid and enforceable. The Bellamy Trust will revert to its original form. Delaney Hart is the rightful beneficiary of the property and associated assets. Distribution of funds is to be reviewed by a third-party auditor. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Walter smiled from his seat, his hands trembling slightly as he folded the letter back into his pocket. Rachel leaned close to me and whispered, You did it. But I wasn't looking at her. I was watching Colleen. As she walked past me toward the exit, her heels clicking against the floor like punctuation marks, she paused just long enough to lean in. Colleen then hissed when walking past me, Enjoy it while it lasts. There were no banners, no headlines, just a folded note and a child's smile. The old house looked nothing like it used to. The peeling seating had been replaced with soft yellow paint, the porch rails freshly sanded and stained. Inside, the scent of new books mingled with the faintest trace of lavender cleaner. Where once there had been cluttered hallways and dusty curtains, now sunlight poured through large windows, catching on jars of colored pencils and baskets of well-loved paperbacks. We called it the Bellamy Center now, a literacy and art space for kids who needed a place to feel visible. The plaque by the front door read, In memory of Irene Bellamy. For the granddaughters they erased, and the ones who refused to stay erased. I hadn't gone public with any statement after the court ruling. No press release. No fundraiser gala. Just a quiet wire transfer to restore the home, and a simple note to the local paper inviting students and families to our opening day. The first group had arrived shyly. A few fourth graders from the nearby elementary school, a high school sophomore who liked to draw but never showed her sketchbooks, and a boy who clung to his grandmother's hand and wouldn't speak above a whisper. I gave them lemonade and blank journals and told them this place was for them. Not to impress anyone, not to prove anything. Just a room where they mattered. One of the younger girls had spent the morning gluing bits of ribbon to a folded scrap of construction paper. I hadn't paid much attention until she walked up to me near the end of the day and held it out with both hands. This is for you, she said. I knelt to her level. You made this? She nodded proudly. It's a badge, like the ones grown-ups wear when they're important. The badge was lopsided, the glue still damp in spots, the edges trimmed unevenly. But I had never seen anything more precise in my life. "Well, thank you," I said, my throat thickening. "I think this might be the best one I've ever had." I pinned it to my cardigan, right over the spot where, years ago, I'd clipped a white tag that simply read, "Guest." Later, as the kids flipped through their sketchbooks and settled in for the last read aloud of the day, I stepped into the office. There was an envelope on my desk with no return address. My name was written in sharp, slanted cursive I knew instantly. Inside was a single page. You mattered long before I saw it. Savannah. No apology, no excuses, just that. I folded the letter carefully and placed it inside the small lockbox I kept tucked beneath the bookshelf. It joined a few other things now: a scan of Irene's original trust, the church bulletin she'd once doodled on, and the paper badge still faintly smelling of glue and hope. I didn't know if Colleen ever spoke of me again. I didn't need to know. The foundation had entered a long-term audit. Martin had resigned from the board quietly. Savannah had moved to Portland and deleted most of her social media. The world went on, as it always does, and so did I. Each Tuesday, we hosted poetry night. Fridays were for art. I taught the kids how to use the old typewriter I'd rescued from the library, how to press each key with purpose. Sometimes, I sat in the back row and just listened to them read their stories aloud. Funny, wild, sad, and brave. No one asked me to lead, but I showed up anyway. And for the first time, I didn't wish for their table. I had my own, and every seat was earned, not assigned. There are places in life where you don't need a spotlight to feel seen, just a quiet chair, your name remembered, and someone who listens without needing to fix you. That little room full of children and crayons taught me more about legacy than any family crest ever could. Kindness doesn't always wear a ribbon or carry a title. It lives in the steady hands that hold the truth, even when no one's looking. When we stop judging by what fits the picture and start honoring what holds us together, we make room for something real. If this story meant something to you, perhaps think of the person who's always stayed on the edge of the photo, and let them know you see them now.